Chris Allison, thank you very much, and thank you for joining us. I'm Hannah Bourne-Jones in London, and this is CNN Newsroom. It's a busy day for Britain's Prime Minister. She'll need to impress the leader of Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party in order to keep her own party afloat. US Attorney General Jeff Sessions set to testify in Washington just hours from now. His contacts with the Russian ambassador under the microscope, as he's expected to respond to claims made by the fired FBI Director James Comey. A controversial visit by a former basketball star. Dennis Rodman is back in North Korea. The unusual trip comes amid international condemnation of Pyongyang's recent missile tests. So Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May is headed to France for a face-to-face meeting with Emmanuel Macron. Theresa May had planned to confront the inexperienced French president as a strong and stable leader, bolstered by a snap election landslide. Instead, a week before Brexit negotiations are due to begin, her position is weaker than ever, while Mr Macron's supporters had a strong showing in Sunday's French parliamentary election. Before leaving Britain, Mrs May has more high-stakes deals to discuss here at home. Leaders from Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party just arrived in Downing Street. Theresa May wants its support to prop up her minority government. The DUP has said it plans to present a list of demands, and with Theresa May's majority gone, the Prime Minister may have very little room for manoeuvre. On Monday, Mrs May convinced her party to give her another chance, reportedly saying, "I got us into this mess and I'm going to get us out of it." From Downing Street, CNN's Oren Lieberman has more on Theresa May's meeting with the DUP, and Nina Dos Santos is live for us in Strasbourg with a preview of the Prime Minister's talks with the French President. Oren, to you first. Certainly it is high stakes for Mrs May today, negotiations on both sides of the English Channel. How is she getting on with Arlene Foster's DUP to start with?
Well, Arlene Foster, the leader of the DUP, is expected here in just a few minutes. She actually hasn't arrived yet. Theresa May's cabinet meeting wrapped up just a short time ago, and as the ministers came out, none of them really said anything as the questions of what's up with the Tory manifesto, where are the campaign pledges, and what will be with the DUP. Those questions mostly unanswered, except notably Boris Johnson, Foreign Secretary. Perhaps not a surprise there. When he was asked, is Brexit still Brexit? He smiled and said, yes, it'll be a great Brexit. Now to the meeting with the DUP and Arlene Foster. That meeting is critical for Theresa May to stay here at 10 Downing, to stay as Prime Minister. But just the fact that Foster is meeting with May is an indication that both of these parties want to work together. They both want to work together on Brexit, and perhaps another unifying factor there is their dislike of Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. So that's the groundwork that they have to work with. The question for Theresa May is, at what cost? Arlene Foster has a lot of leverage in this entire process and can make quite a few demands. First, of course, more money for Northern Ireland. That seems obvious. But then she can make demands on what shape Brexit takes, since she essentially has veto power of any move that Theresa May tries to make there. She may want a softer border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, as well as a number of other demands that she can place on the process. So she has all the leverage here, and that's a familiar feeling for Theresa May going forward, because Brexit negotiators on the EU side have already made it clear that they have the leverage there, and they know it. So it'll be a few difficult meetings, starting with Arlene Foster, which again we expect to start in just a little bit here at 10 Downing Street behind me. Hannah?
OK, let's bring in Nina Dos Santos, who's live for us in Strasbourg, and everyone's now starting to think towards Brexit and what shape that might be. And we're already starting to hear, Nina, from some of those EU negotiators questioning the UK's position and Theresa May's authority going into these talks.
That's right. I've just been speaking to Elmar Brok, who's a very influential Conservative German MEP, who's also part of the steering committee negotiating on behalf of the European Parliament on the issue of Brexit. And yes, he was questioning Theresa May's authority, saying we're ready to go, but we just don't know whether there's a government in Westminster that is ready to go. So chaos, confusion and plenty of questions over the deadlines for Brexit, whether they're set to start on the official date of June the 19th, the reigning here in the European Parliament in Strasbourg. Strasbourg, France. There is some delight, though, that Emmanuel Macron has managed to score big in this first round of the legislative elections in France, because remember that he's put Europe right at the heart of his reform programme for France. And in fact, he's also developed a strong relationship already in his first couple of months in office with Angela Merkel of Germany. And so people are expecting that Franco-German axis in the European Union to try and counterbalance some of the instability that Brexit is likely to bring forward. But when you speak to the chief negotiator on behalf of the European Parliament, the former Belgian Prime Minister Guy Verhofstadt, as I just did moments ago, you can really hear that there's impatience and exasperation here, that there shouldn't be an opportunity to let Britain try and, I suppose, push back the deadlines on Brexit, because it's such a big deal for the EU as well as for the UK. Take a listen to one thing he had to say just moments ago.
We want that the UK government is taking position now after the outcome of the election. It's clear that we need a message from them, their opinion, their position. Do they confirm, I should say, the hard Brexit as they announced in the letter of the 29th of March, or do they change their position, taking into account the outcome of this election?
Now, Hannah, I pressed Mr Verhofstadt about whether or not the UK might be given an extension to that 2-year window for negotiating Brexit. Otherwise, it'll afterwards be kicked out of the bloc without any safeguards and so on and so forth. He was pretty strict on that. He said, no, the deadline is 29th of March 2019. Article 50 was activated on 29th of March 2 years before that. We will not give the UK any more leeway, so it's imperative that the UK gets on with these negotiations straight away. And that's the point that's been reiterated also by the person who's going to be negotiating on behalf of the executive arm of the EU, the European Commission. Michel Barnier gave an interview to the Financial Times and various other European newspapers yesterday, which was published today, and in that he said the UK must stop wasting time, it must get on with the job. He said it's a very complex negotiation that's set to take place. The deadlines could slip. They're nervous about that, quote unquote, I cannot negotiate with myself. So the message here from the EU is they want to know what the UK wants after this uncertain outcome, and they want an assurance that the UK will get on with the job, to borrow one of Theresa May's catchphrases when it comes to negotiating Brexit. Hannah?
Nina in Strasbourg for us, and Oren Lieberman on Downing Street. Thank you. And let's turn to Washington now, where a friend of Donald Trump says the president is weighing whether to fire special counsel Robert Mueller. A source tells CNN advisors are imploring Mr. Trump not to fire the man who is now leading the Russia probe. CNN's Ryan Nobles joins me now live from Washington. And Ryan, this Russian cloud is hanging thicker than ever, it seems, over the president today.
Yeah, Hannah, and there's little doubt that it will be any clearer after Attorney General Sessions' testimony today on Capitol Hill. He will be grilled by Senate intelligence members, but just how forthcoming he will be remains to be seen. And his testimony comes at a time where it appears that President Trump and some of his associates may be attempting to interfere with the work of the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller.
I think he's considering perhaps terminating the special counsel.
Just hours after leaving the White House, President Trump's longtime friend, Newsmax CEO Christopher Ruddy, claims the president is considering firing special counsel Robert Mueller, the man in charge of investigating possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia.
I think he's weighing that option. I think it's pretty clear by what one of his lawyers said on television recently. I personally think it would be a very significant mistake.
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer insisting Mr. Ruddy never spoke to the president regarding this issue. But hours earlier, Spicer's deputy said that Ruddy, quote, speaks for himself. Several Trump allies now attacking Mueller's credibility despite initially praising his appointment. Former Trump campaign advisor Newt Gingrich tweeting Monday, Republicans are delusional if they think the special counsel is going to be fair. But only last month, Gingrich praised Mueller as a, quote, superb choice. One of the reasons for the revolt, who Mueller has hired for his legal team. CNN analysis of FEC records reveals 3 of the 5 lawyers on Mueller's team have donated almost exclusively to Democrats, with 2 giving the maximum donation to Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. Still, White House sources tell CNN Trump's advisors are urging him not to fire Mueller, a move lawmakers feel could backfire.
It would be absolutely astonishing were he to entertain this. The echoes of Watergate are getting louder and louder.
All this comes ahead of today's public testimony by embattled Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Sessions is expected to face a grilling about his contacts with Russia and the firing of James Comey.
He was very close to and inevitably going to recuse himself for a variety of reasons. We also were aware of facts that I can't discuss in an open setting that would make his continued engagement in a Russia-related investigation problematic.
Sources tell CNN Comey told senators behind closed doors that Sessions may have had a third meeting with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak, which the Justice Department denies. It will likely be brought up today, along with Comey's account that Sessions was booted from an Oval Office meeting back in February before Comey said the president asked him to drop the Michael Flynn investigation.
My sense was the Attorney General knew he shouldn't be leaving, which is why he was lingering.
It's unclear whether Sessions will invoke executive privilege to avoid answering questions.
Do you believe that he should invoke executive privilege on conversations between himself and the president as it relates to Jim Comey?
I think it depends on the scope of the questions.
And Hannah, the idea that the president may attempt to fire the special prosecutor Robert Mueller is truly being roundly condemned by both Republicans and Democrats, and among them the House Speaker Paul Ryan, who is of course a Republican. He was on conservative radio host Hugh Hewitt's radio show this morning, and he told the guest host Guy Benson that he believes that Bob Mueller should be allowed to do his job. So this, if it were to happen, would be an enormously controversial move. But as we've seen in the past, Hannah, the president is not above really controversial moves.
Certainly isn't. Ryan Nobles live for us in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you.
And as Ryan just mentioned in his report, Attorney General Jeff Sessions has been under scrutiny for his interactions with the Russian ambassador to the United States. Jill Doherty is in Moscow to explain for us. Jill, the ambassador in question here is Sergei Kislyak. Just who is he, and why is there so much suspicion about all of these meetings he may or may not have had with Trump's transition team?
Well, he's a very experienced diplomat. He worked in the United States for quite a while, really one of the senior people in the foreign ministry. And the reason he's pretty controversial is that he met with a number of people in the Trump campaign and then later in the Trump administration. And those people, especially Mr. Sessions, did not report that on their security clearances. So there is concern. What were those conversations about? We do know that the way a lot of this came up was because the telephone that apparently the ambassador used was being tapped in some way by American intelligence, and these things came out in the course of investigations. So there are a lot more questions than anything about all of this. And interestingly, just very recently, a few days ago, at the end of last week, Ambassador Kislyak was quoted. He gave a speech in the United States, and he was talking about relations with the United States. And in fact, he said, Americans are going through a tough period right now, and that is affecting relations with the United States, with Russia. And he even said that the administration doesn't really have its Russia policy together. But it was a pretty positive speech. So he's watching this. The Russians are certainly watching this. And no matter how it all turns out at this stage, it is not good for the relationship, because there are a lot of questions, and those questions are going to continue.
And in a move short of further sour relations between the U.S. and Russia, we understand now that the U.S. Senate has some kind of deal on the table for further sanctions against Russia. What kind of response have we had from the Kremlin?
Yeah, well, of course, you can imagine the Kremlin is not happy. And Dmitry Peskov, who is a spokesperson for the president, said, used one word. He said negative reaction to that. But then the Russians are used to this, because they've been dealing with sanctions for Ukraine, for what they would say is alleged interference or non-interference in the American election. And now we have kind of, I would say, a more serious step by the Senate to put some sanctions in place, or at least control sanctions, increase them, and then also give congressional control or oversight over those sanctions, so that the White House, should President Trump want to ease those sanctions, would find it very difficult to do. And that is important, because the Russians were hoping way back during the campaign that eventually sanctions might be eased. It certainly is not looking that way, and the Senate is taking steps to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Jill, appreciate it. Jill Doherty live for us in Moscow. And just a reminder to our viewers as well, be sure to tune in for CNN's special coverage of U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions' testimony in the Senate. That's at 2 p.m. in New York, 7 p.m. here in London. All the coverage right here on CNN. Coming up on the program, North Korea is hosting one of Kim Jong-un's biggest fans. Basketball legend Dennis Rodman returns for his 5th visit. We'll bring you the latest from a CNN crew inside Pyongyang.
Hi, I'm Jen.
Hi, I'm Adam.
Hi, I'm Miguel, and we're here in Macedonia.
There's been so much to see here in the Republic of Macedonia.
I really enjoyed Mavrovo. We visited an amazing church sunken in the lake.
Everywhere you look, it's almost untouched.
It's really beautiful. The highlight for me has to be visiting the 1,000-year-old monastery of St. Jovan Bigorski.
Lake Ohrid is something that I always remember.
Scuba diving, it was perfect.
I'd come back here with my family, I'd come back with my friends. There's something for everyone.
Focused on issues of health and nutrition, education and economic empowerment, the Dangote Foundation is the largest private foundation in sub-Saharan Africa. Dangote Foundation, touching lives.
Join me, Kate Baldwin, for the latest in U.S. politics. We have smart discussions and a whole lot of fun.
State of America, weeknights on CNN. And get more State of America on the new podcast. Subscribe now with your favorite app.
One of the few Americans who have ever met Kim Jong-un is back in North Korea. Basketball star Dennis Rodman arrived in the capital Pyongyang in the last few hours. Our Will Ripley is also in the North Korean capital and has more now.
Dennis Rodman is back in North Korea for the 5th time. His flight landed on time here at the international arrivals section of the Pyongyang airport, and he didn't want to answer a lot of questions when we saw him outside of the VIP lounge. Dennis, are you bringing a message from President Trump to North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un?
I'm just here to come see some friends and have a good time.
He was accompanied by a Columbia University professor who is believed to be here as his translator, along with another colleague. Rodman and that colleague wearing the T-shirts of a U.S. cryptocurrency company, apparently the sponsor of this trip. That sponsor put out a statement online saying that Rodman is in a very unique position because he is friends with President Trump, having appeared on Celebrity Apprentice twice, but he's also friends with North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. He has made, previous to this visit, 4 trips to the country, 3 of them between 2013 and 2014. Part of those trips were documented on a film, a very controversial film in the United States, because Rodman's behavior here in North Korea was described as out of control. He yelled on live television at CNN's Chris Cuomo during an interview, and it was that behavior that reportedly caused the North Korean leader to cancel one scheduled visit towards the end of Rodman's trip. But nonetheless, he's back in the country, and there are a lot of questions about what exactly is behind this visit. Obviously, tensions are high on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea has attempted to launch more than a dozen missiles so far this year, and of course, North Korea is also holding 4 detained Americans. But when I tried to ask Rodman if he's going to be talking about any of those things during his time here, he didn't have much to say. Have you spoken, Mr. Rodman, with anybody? No. Have you spoken with anyone with the U.S. government about this trip?
No question.
Do you plan to talk about the detained Americans? Rodman's host here in North Korea is the sports ministry of this country, and he has said that part of his mission here is to try to continue this kind of sports diplomacy that he talked about during his previous visits a few years ago. Regardless of what happens, it's certainly going to be an interesting few days here in North Korea, with an ex-NBA star once again making an appearance in one of the most inaccessible countries on earth. Will Ripley, CNN, Pyongyang, North Korea.
Ripley there. It is week 2 of the crisis in Qatar, and while residents are relieved they are not facing food shortages, we'll tell you about some other economic impact that they are likely to be facing very, very soon after the break.
Inside Africa Fact File, in association with Zenith Bank.
It's taken 10 years. The business traveller is back. Lagos, Nigeria. The difficulty of flying in this country.
There are more private planes than commercial aircraft.
The boutique hotels take on the chains.
I think bring it on.
You do? And a gigantic gallery of African art.
Amazing.
A true Nigerian welcome on the next CNN Business Traveller.
In association with Invest Macedonia and Macedonia Tourism.
I'm Delia Gallagher in Vatican City, and this is CNN.
To Russia now, where hundreds of people have been arrested in nationwide anti-government protests, among them the Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. He was the one who called for the rallies and has been sentenced to 30 days in detention. According to an independent monitoring group, at least 1,400 people have been arrested, mostly in large urban centres. From St. Petersburg, our Diana Magne has more.
They were warned it would end up this way. Protest against Putin, and on a patriotic Russian national holiday, it's not going to end well. In many places, the rallies called by Alexei Navalny's anti-corruption campaign were banned. But the young and digitally savvy who follow him on YouTube came anyway. Thousands across the country, though it was St. Petersburg and Moscow where most arrests were made.
That chant means you will not jail everybody. They've been funneling some people who they've arrested out from the crowds, but as you can see, there are so many more who are determined to keep protesting.
Navalny wasn't there. He was detained at his home before the Moscow protest began. But the crowds knew his message. Emblem of these demonstrations, the rubber duck. Almost surreal in this setting, but a dig at alleged corruption surrounding Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev. Claims he calls nonsense.
At our Prime Minister's house, there is a big pond, which has a special duck house in the middle of it. So this has become a symbol of how easily bribed he is, of his corruption.
In Moscow, thousands took over one of the city's busiest streets. They unfurled Russian flags and chanted "Putin out" and "Putin's a thief." Here too, riot police rushed in to snatch demonstrators, beating several, some of them little more than teenagers. Back in St. Petersburg, as the police buses filled up with protesters, one more surreal moment. In amongst the crowds, a man on bended knee and a little jewellery box. A diamond in the rough of Russian politics, you might say. His choice of time and place seemed to have worked. Diana Magnay, CNN, St. Petersburg.
The blockade against Qatar is now entering its second week. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf neighbours have cut diplomatic ties with Doha and imposed varying degrees of economic sanctions. And while the crisis has not yet led to major shortages of food or other crucial supplies, there are bigger concerns about how it could impact Qatar's future. Jumana Karachi reports now.
Throughout the Qatari capital, this is what stores look like, well-stocked with no apparent shortages. When the diplomatic crisis erupted last week and Qatar's neighbors imposed a blockade, people were worried. This tiny emirate imports most of its food supplies, with significant amounts coming through its only land border, the one with Saudi Arabia, now closed. There were initial scenes of panic buying and empty shelves, but the government was quick to reassure people that it was prepared for a scenario like this one. Products already in storage from the UAE and Saudi Arabia still available. And new fresh products from Turkey have now replaced the previously imported ones from Saudi. 60-ton shipments from Turkey are scheduled to arrive every 2 days, with Iran too stepping in to fill the void, sending several plane loads of fresh goods this past week.
I didn't feel that it changed. Maybe the first day we had a fear, but the second day no fear anymore. Everything is available, vegetables, everything.
Shoppers like Suleiman and Abu Suleiman tell us they have hardly noticed the change. Since the start of the crisis, Qatar has opened several new trade lines. But experts warn the longer the crisis goes on, the risk for significant economic impact will grow.
I do not think there is a humanitarian issue here. I think there is a potential economic impact, and that will be about more complex supply lines, the potential disruption for goods coming into Qatar through these more convoluted routes, and the potential inflationary impact of finding new routes and new channels to bring goods in.
It's not just about food. With a construction boom and preparing for a FIFA World Cup in 2022, possible shortages in construction materials imported through Saudi is a concern.
I think the wider impact isn't directly on the economies of the countries imposing the blockade. I think it's more on the risk is more about the perception of the region. One of the great aspects of the GCC region has been the sense of stability in this region, where there is so much instability going on outside the region.
Despite the unprecedented events, Qatar is making sure it's business as usual. Jumana Karachi, CNN, Doha.
I'm Hannah Vaughan-Jones in London. Thanks so much for your company. I will be back with a check on the headlines for you in just a moment.
The Dangote Group stands at the forefront of African enterprise. Since 1978, we've touched the lives of millions of people by meeting their basic needs. Our belief in the promise of Africa has taken us into 14 African countries. With substantial investments that will propel the continent towards greater prosperity, promising jobs, improved standards of living and economic growth. Dangote, for an empowered Africa.
What defines cutting-edge investments in today's global real estate market? Host John Defterios in 1 Square Meter gives you a rare peek behind the trendiest places, the best developments, and unique projects around the world. From San Francisco to Shanghai, 1 Square Meter seeks out the most interesting places and takes an inside look at international properties. 1 Square Meter, today in Connect the World with Becky Anderson, in association with MR. CNN Supercharged. Plug into the first ever all-electric racing series, Formula E. Go behind the scenes with Nikki Shields in the cities hosting the E-Prix action. Meet the drivers racing through downtown street circuits across the globe. And check out the technology driving us all towards a greener future. CNN Supercharged, Saturday on CNN, in association with DHL.
CNN Equestrian Global Champions is in the south of France, in Cannes, mixing glamour and top-class sport. This is one of 15 stunning locations around the world, which makes up the Global Champions Tour and Global Champions League.
CNN Equestrian Global Champions, Friday on CNN.
I'm Clarissa Ward in northern Syria. This is CNN.
Hello, I'm Hannah Vaughan-Jones in London. This is CNN News Now. In the coming hours, U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions will testify in public before the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senators want to know about his contacts with Russian officials while he was part of the Trump campaign. Sessions could refuse to answer some questions, citing executive privilege. British Prime Minister Theresa May is preparing for two crucial meetings. First, she tries to cut a deal with Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party. The Prime Minister needs its support to keep her minority government afloat. Then she flies to France for a meeting with newly elected President Emmanuel Macron. Basketball Hall of Famer Dennis Rodman is on his 5th visit to North Korea. He touched down in Pyongyang a short time ago. He would only say he's hoping to do something positive while there. 4 Americans are currently being detained in North Korea. When asked if he would raise that issue, Rodman said that's not his purpose right now. That is your CNN News Now. Stay tuned. World Sport starts right now.